Welcome to the Ministries Podcast. This month we are talking about let us not forget PTSD. A lot of times when we think about healing through the pain, it's something that we try to avoid at all costs. Pain a lot of times instills kind of gut response to avoid it at all costs, like I said. And a lot of times when we think about forgetting and not remembering, we look at the calendars. It's filled with things for us to remember. And this month, I do not want to forget. It's hold dear to me. I have a new guest today. Her name is Chrisitine Hammond, and she's going to share some of her insight with us. I'm so excited to have her. Thank you, Christine, for coming on and sharing your insight. A lot of times when we think about pain, we're just running for the hills, but a lot of times with trauma, it's sometimes those steps forward when we have to go through the pain. So, Christine, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this.
I just want to share those who are listening. If you are in crisis in the United States, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. I do want to share those who are listening around the world, wherever you are, to find what resources are available. It's always good and tactful to to collect that information because you never know. It may not be you, it may be a friend, a loved one, because it's all about why is this important is because of the people. So before I begin, Christy, I always start with a quote, and those people in the UK love this person a lot. She's a writer of Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, and she says, "Numbing the pain for a while will make it worse when you finally feel it." What comes to mind when you hear this quote? I feel it's intriguing how she words it.
So I couldn't agree more. It is actually something I say quite often to my clients on a regular basis. And when I think of it, I think about the process of grief. Anytime we go through a major life change, whether it is something that happens to us job-wise or family-wise, through marriages, through a death, through a traumatic incident, there's a grieving process that usually accompanies that. And what I tell them is that grief is one of those things that you have to walk through. You can't walk over it. You can't walk around it. You can't try to ignore it, pretend it doesn't exist, because it's going to come back and bite you later on if you try to. And so it's so important that we walk through the most difficult and uncomfortable feelings and moments that we have in our life right when they're happening, so that it doesn't pile up later on in life when we least want it to appear.
One of my friends this past Christmas lost his father on Christmas Day. And one of the things is that process. I always tell them, you do not rush through it. You have to allow yourself time to heal. The safe place model, a lot of my clients, myself, I always try to, it's not just one thing. It's a holistic idea of, you got, some people do good with therapy, some do be good with groups, but it's all of it together. And one of the things I tell my friend, because I have experienced losses, it's not hard when it actually happens. It's like you get a lot of support, but what happens is the day after, when everything gets back to normal, and those anniversaries that come up to kind of jog those memories of loss, and loss comes in all shapes, sizes, and forms. So
it does.
And I remember this one. I know I just thought of this when you were talking. When you talk about trauma, this one person explained it this way. I really thought it was a good illustration. It's like when you're in the forest, you see a bear, you react, survival instinct. But what if that bear is when you're trying to go to sleep, when you're around your family, or when you're walking down with your spouse? Sometimes, at least for me, I experienced, or I know peers or my friends who have experienced the inconvenience of not taking care of some of these or not addressing some of this pain, like you were saying. So
when you're talking about survival mode, like it, a lot of people just think of it as being fight or flight that you kind of go into, but there's actually 4 different versions of it. So it's fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And so what's important to recognize is that which one you choose is actually born in childhood. And it's not something that you can decide. So you can't like wake up one day and say, oh, I think I'm going to fight today. The reason why the military does the extensive training that it does is because they're trying to eliminate the other three natural responses, which are the freeze, the faint, and the flee, because they definitely don't want you doing any of those when you're in a crisis situation. They just want you to fight because that's what you're trained to do. And so when we're thinking about that, like the survival mode, is, although it's born in childhood, it can very much change over time, depending on other traumas that you have, or in the case of like military training, it absolutely will change during that time period. So what works in the military then does not work back in civilian life.
No, it doesn't.
And that's the problem that we have, because there's no like deprogramming out of that fight mode back into what I would call another response when you go into survival mode. And when you hit survival mode, it takes anywhere between 36 to 72 hours for the hormones to fully reset back to normal. So you can imagine for some people, within that 36 hours or 72 hours, they might have had something else that re-triggers them. So they're constantly stuck in this state of survival mode over and over again, which wreaks havoc on your body and shuts down your body from being able to function properly, from you to be able to sleep well, and even eating, and everything is like compounded by that.
I was watching, one of the, I went to one of these, mental health symposiums where I'm from, and they had the ACE study. They kept talking the ACE study, the adverse childhood experience, and I'm kind of pushing that because, and I feel culturally, because I'm half South Korean, half Puerto Rican, so culturally, like if I was struggling, it's we don't have time for struggling. There's a lot of high expectations for that, and I do like how you bring up childhood, because it's something cultural. Like when you think about roadblocks, especially me being working with my clients, it's not just the environment; it's also cultural barriers are there too. And I remember with my mom. She just took me to acupuncture, every alternative medicine first, trying to help me, because she's like, I need you to be cured. I need you to be better. And I am so blessed to have her in my life, just the strength that she portrays. But at the same time, at time it wasn't as useful, because I was never given the processing time to kind of go through the process. But, I think there are cultural barriers, but I want to talk about fear. It can be also a stumbling block in moving forward in recovery, especially in trauma. What have you seen personally that has worked, and what has not, and with your clients, or that kind of sticks out to you when we talk about trauma or all this stuff?
So when I think of fear, I think of the acronym false evidence appearing real, right? And so what's interesting about that definition of fear is that it's not true, right? And so, but I do want to distinguish between like good fear and bad fear, right? Okay. Because there is a good fear, and the good fear is the fear that warns you that there is danger in front of you. Yeah. And it's always important to listen to that instinct. The bad fear is the false evidence appearing real. So that is where you're afraid of something that is not as likely to happen, right? Yeah. So I'll give you an example because it will help. Like if I am driving in my car and all of a sudden I have this fear that comes over me, and I immediately look around and I'm like scanning my environment, I'm being hyper vigilant in the moment. If there's nothing around me and I still feel the fear, that's false evidence appearing real. Okay. Yeah. But if I have that immediate fear and then all of a sudden I'm scanning my environment and I see somebody running out into the middle of the freeway while I'm driving, okay, that's good fear, right? Yeah. It's warning me and it's telling me to pay attention. And so it's so important that we distinguish the difference between fear that is helpful and productive and
Yeah.
fear that isn't helpful and isn't productive. And that's kind of where things get caught and mixed up. Like our wires get crossed in our brain as to which one it could possibly be. And when you're stuck in trauma, it's very hard to distinguish the difference between the two, which is usually why it's helpful to have somebody that walks you through it, a counselor, a therapist that can kind of from the outside look in and say, okay, this is an example of where your fear was spot on. Like, you were afraid of something happening and sure enough, it happened. Or this is an example of when your fear was overacting. It was like reacting in a bad way, not at the right time. There was no evidence that something bad was happening around you. And so that's where therapy is actually very helpful in trying to discern the difference between the two of you, but between the two of them.
Yeah. And when I think about fear, I kind of look at, what we went through in 2020 with this whole COVID and this whole uncertainty and everything like that, and how there's a lot of false evidence appearing real because of that. Because I could see it with some of my clients. They kind of I'll go through this thought exercise with them, ask them why. They'll say, I can't do this. I'm like, why? And they keep going down, and then it circles around back to the original reason, and there's no real conclusion. They're just kind of stuck. We could convince ourselves to anything, convince ourselves to do things that we probably shouldn't do, or not to do things. And I feel like COVID, I've seen in some aspects, I've seen the best in people actually striving through this new reality, and other people who are just stuck because they're just like, there's fear. It's good. It's comfortable, and they don't want to admit it's comfortable in their own, and they don't want to go through the reality. And I feel like that takes little steps, but fear, the uncertainty is always going to be there. That's the whole thing. Change continually happens every single day of our lives. But it's just how we respond. I remember Albert Einstein said it this way: intelligence is the ability to adapt to change. That's it. And I feel that he had something going there when he said that. I hear there's this one quote I want to share, and it's from James Baldwin. He says, I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain. I see this a lot, because I'm a leader in my church, and I see sometimes some of the most people I don't want to deal with in church. They're really, but underneath it all is a lot of pain. They make big scenes, but a lot of times it's just I don't know. So when you hear this quote, what comes to mind, Christine?
So hate is a rather strong word, and some people are try to avoid hate. But if we're talking about, there are some things that I think are okay to hate, and it's actually perfectly appropriate in some instances to allow that to exist. For instance, hating the fact that a child is getting abused, right?
Yeah.
That is an appropriate hate. And so I don't mind any feelings or emotions that people have. I don't like to throw them into good or bad categories. But I do agree with the concept that sometimes an emotion is covering up another deeper emotion. And so fear, for instance, is a great example that sometimes fear is covering up another emotion. Hate absolutely can cover up pain. Anxiety can cover up depression or guilt. So we often find that one emotion actually covers up another. And usually what we do is we cling to what I call the base emotions. So anger is a great example of an emotion for which people will cling to anger because it's so much easier to feel the anger than it is to feel the disappointment or the rejection.
Yeah.
And so we cling to hate as much as we cling to fear or anger, because it's so much easier to feel those base emotions than it is to feel the full range of other emotions that are actually underneath it.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times, especially with my peers, I notice one of the key things that is the biggest complaint is they don't feel heard. That's it. They don't feel heard. I could say a lot of things. I could be angry, but really when it comes down to is I feel left out. I feel like no one's listening to me. No one's hearing me. For me, when it comes to, like you said, I remember reading or that feelings are good. They're good servants, not good masters. They're good to kind of tell us where we're at. Whenever someone's angry, I'm not like, oh, that's a bad emotion, do not have it. I'm just more like, maybe something needs to change. Something has to be addressed, because obviously something came up to this point of anger. But a lot of times when we think about feelings, there's a lot of shame associated with it. I feel hate. Well, why? Well, why do we just address hate as like all encompassing, that they all are the same? But people have the right, and that I feel that goes back to trauma, because a lot of times there's a lot of complex feelings when it comes to it. And if you're not allowed to feel them, how can you actually process them? If everything's like, oh, I can't feel angry now, I can't be sad in front of people because they're going to be too worried. I feel that's when you start, your safe place gets shrinking and shrinking. You don't have any room to actually process these feelings out, because it's not acceptable, because you're in some environments.
It goes back to the first thing that we were saying, right?
Yeah.
Like if you don't allow yourself to feel what you are in the moment, then it's going to come back to bite you later. And so this is an example of, when you don't allow yourself to feel or experience pain or sadness or rejection, that then it's going to get masked by another feeling, and that isn't going to be that will be counterproductive to you actually doing better and doing well. And it'll just feel like it compounds one on top of the other in a very unnecessary fashion.
Yeah. And one thing I also noticed is value. I know that's kind of a weird concept but I thought value plays a role when it comes to recovery. When you think of one of my close friends, she's substance use, disorder, and she struggles. But she told me, she's like, Rob, if every day was just not picking up a drink, it becomes kind of redundant. It becomes kind of meaningless. There has to be something more. I never proselytize in my podcast, but I do promote the idea of purpose-driven recovery. There has to be something, like, even if it's something you like. I asked one of my peers, what do you like to do as a hobby? And they couldn't say it. And it's very telling when someone can't even think of a hobby. We're a culture that has to be busy or else we're not successful. If we're not busy enough, we're not successful enough. And I feel sometimes it kind of skews where we have that ability to kind of say, I'm value. I have purpose in my life, not just not drinking or not doing this. It's more than that. And I feel, any thoughts on that? And I want to go to another quote.
So our value comes from how we perceive ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? And so what's really important is that we have our own sense of value, not from how others perceive us, but how we perceive ourselves in a very healthy manner. And that can be taken to the extreme in the opposite direction, right?
Yeah.
So everything has to be in a balance in and of itself. Like if you value yourself as being the best singer out there, but yet you can't hit a note, then that is not going to really work, right?
Yeah.
So there has to be some level of input without others completely defining who you are.
Yeah.
And the value has to be in your sense of worth and who you are as a person, and just seeing yourself having, certain traits and characteristics that are unique and that are individualized to you. And then seeing that there's value in and of it, not in what you do, not in how many family or friends that you have, but rather in the existence of yourself by itself, all by itself.
I like, there's one person said, we're not human doings, we're human beings. So we become something else. And I do like that kind of mindset, because the thing is, you're right, it's not just, it's how we see ourselves, especially in a faith setting. I don't look at how much the person knows what they do. It's more how they view themselves. And sometimes you use the model of how God sees us, because if we see how God sees us, we'll kind of define how we see other people. kind of
Right.
And that kind of, and I feel that is very true when we think about value. Value stems from the idea that it's not, with so much uncertainty, if we put all our eggs in one basket, only if statements in our lives, only if I'm with this person will I be valued. It's a tricky thing, because you're depending on someone who constantly changes, and life constantly changes. When you kind of center yourself, whatever faith, whatever you believe, whatever value you have, it's more sustainable because it's within your own perception of yourself, not in someone else's. And like you were saying, and I do like that. Mary Ann Ratchmaster says, I like what she says here. It says, courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is a quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. It's okay to not be okay. Like, I see some people, they make mistakes. I'm like, it's okay. It's not about how many times you make mistakes, how many times you get up. A lot of times we don't allow ourselves the room. It's like, only if. So I love what she says here. What are your thoughts when you think about seeing this and everything else?
So I think it's always important to like be in the present moment, but at the same time be forward thinking and not looking towards the past in a way of regret and disappointment and rejection. And we can all get stuck in doing that. That's just a pattern that happens to us. But if we constantly work on being very present and in the present moment, then it's okay to try again the next day. Like, it makes it so much easier for you to move forward when you're present. And also in light of what the whole concept of PTSD, like one of the helps for dealing with that, is to be very present. So when you have somebody who is suffering from PTSD, actually finding ways to be in the present moment is very useful.
Yeah. I personally, a few years ago, went through EMDR therapy. And for me, it was very helpful. For others, not so much. It's different for everyone. I just want, what you were saying, and this remind me of this. It's from James Thurber. I didn't even put it in the outline. He said, "Let us not look back in anger, nor forward in fear, but around in awareness." I kind of like that, because it kind of balances all out, because we don't want too much of one thing or another thing. We're talking about PTSD. We're talking about when it comes to PTSD and remembering it. A lot of times when it comes to pains, we try to shut it out. Let us remember, let us put a tribute to those who are still struggling to this day. Trauma is something that was only recognized, if I read correctly, in 1980s. That was actually put in the DSMV. And it's funny, because before that, it was seen as a weakness. It was seen like it was a personal weakness. Now they're saying that specific events, I think I remember reading this, it says that that's not a personal weakness. It is actual. And I do like that transition, because it allows room and allows the people who are struggling with PTSD. I was in the military myself. I was there during 9/11 and Iraqi and all that. So I know some people who still struggle to this day, and some people, unfortunately, don't get the care that they need. And this is why we do these tributes. We do these tributes because we want to say it's okay to not be okay. Today might not be a good day, but I do feel like we talked about in the beginning. If you do feel like you're in crisis, you can call your crisis hotline, or if look what's around you, see what resources out there, talk to someone, get involved in a support group. get involved with something, whether it's church, whether it's a club, whether it's a sport, do something, be part of something. The social aspect in recovery, I find very helpful. Not the entire thing, but very helpful nonetheless. So, Christine, I just want to ask you, any final thoughts? We kind of went through a kind of plethora, this month we've been talking about, I talked with other guests, but, I found your approach very measured, very balanced, very kind of like, it wasn't just one. With a lot of people who come on my guests, and I do love them, they'll just have one kind of niche, and I do appreciate that. But it feels like we're kind of over, and this is the last one of this month, so I do appreciate that. So kind of wrapping things up when it comes to PTSD and tribute to it. So any final thoughts?
Sure. So I just want to say, like, there's not just PTSD, there's complex PTSD, which is something that we very often see in abuse cases. I have a new book that just came out this spring called Abuse Exposed. And in it, we talk about the different types of abuse that people can suffer, which then can lead to either complex PTSD or PTSD itself. And it is so important as you go through your journey of healing and wholeness and recovery that you do really look at some of the abuse that you might have experienced and allow it to like exist in its space and to truly heal from it. Because when you get to the other side of it, it's such a beautiful process. And what I really worked hard in the book is not identifying people as abusers or victims, but rather we're all part of this collective whole, because people who abuse have often been victims, and people who have been victims sometimes abuse. And so it's important to recognize that as people, we all have a tendency to do things that we might later regret, and that has caused harm to others, but that doesn't mean that there can't be healing for everyone. And the more you heal and the better that you do, the better it is for the next generation. And that's what we're trying to do is to allow people to do better for the next generation.
I just want to say thank you, Christine. All the book information, you can send it. I'll put it in the notes for those watching and listening. I always find it. I always appreciate those who are, helping those who are struggling. Part of my recovery, when I actually really made the turn, was when I started helping people. Was my healing, and then what was it? Serving others became my recovery. So right now, it is a blessing to talk to people who are as passionate about this and understand that, each person is different. And why do we care about all this? It's all about the people. It starts with the people. That's why we talk about it, because we talk about those people. Could be our family, could be our mom, spouse, all those people. That's why it matters. Again, thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
I want to share with those. Remember to check out Revive Ministries through the various platforms, reviveministriesfl.com. We're also on YouTube. I want to say this is goodbye from Revive Ministries. We're living with the last quote, and it says, "People go through so much pain trying to avoid pain."
Yes, they do.